Okay, this video is going to walk you through the process of how to make graphs for parent graph inequalities. The first thing you need to consider when making graphs is what kind of line are you going to draw? Is it going to be solid or is it going to be dotted? If you happen to see an equal sign, that means the graph is part of the answer and we're going to make it solid. If there's no equal sign with the graph, then you're going to make it dotted to show that the graph itself is not part of the solution. Next, after you've determined what kind of line you're going to draw, then you're going to go over to the shading side of things. You're going to decide which way you're going to shade. Are you going to shade above the graph or below the graph? When the equation or the inequality reads as y greater than, you're going to shade above, and if it reads as y less than, you'll shade below. Now in this kind of question, you're going to see three different kinds of equation, or inequalities in this case. There are going to be lines, parabolas, and absolute values. Whenever you graph lines, there are two things to consider. The number next to the x, that's your slope. The number that's all by itself with no letter next to it, that's your y-intercept. When making line graphs, you want to start with the y-intercept first and find that number along the y-axis here. And then once you make that graph, you'll be doing the slope next. For example, if you had a slope of 1/2, you'd be going up 1 over 2, and that would be your next click, and you'd have your line. For parabolas, the next thing you need to think about for parabolas have a vertex you're concerned about making first. Whatever you see in parentheses with the x, that's how the graph's vertex will shift left and right. Don't forget it's opposite what you see in these parentheses here. And then whatever's written at the end, that's how far up and down you go. And then the same kind of thing goes the same as with absolute values. They're the same kind of shape graph, except the absolute value graphs are V-shaped versus U-shaped. And they follow the same format. You're going to find a vertex that's also opposite, and using the h and the k values as well. Now in this problem right here, we're given an absolute value and a parabola. So we'll go through the process of how to do those. First of all, we're going to pick the right kind of graph. This one has no equal sign, so I want to choose a solid absolute V-shaped graph. That's this guy right here. There's no equal sign, so we want to choose the dotted V-shaped graph for this first one. Now the vertex is going to be shifting 2 to the right and then up 2. So 2 to the right, up 2. Then you have to be concerned about what is the stretch factor. That stretch factor in the front here is a -1. If it were a -2, you'd go 1 square to the right and down 2. But since this one's -1, we're going to go right 1 square and then just go down 1 square. Lastly, we have to decide which way to shade. This one says y greater than, and again, y greater than is above. So we're going to shade above. You can click anywhere above here. It'll put a dot. That dot just helps the computer decide where the shading should go. So we shaded above the V-shaped graph that's dotted, that shifts 2 to the right and up 2. Now let's look at the parabola next. This parabola is going to be a solid parabola because I see an equal sign. And I also want to make sure I'm shading the correct side of this one. So I'm going to choose the parabola graph that is solid first. And then let's make the vertex. The vertex of our parabola is going to shift opposite right here, 1 to the right, and then down 2. So I go 1 to the right, down 2. There's my graph. Lastly, you have to decide what the stretch factor is. It's -1. So I'm going to go one square to the right, and then down 1 to make that graph. Lastly, this one says y greater than or equal to. So just like the first one, that was y greater than, we're also shading above in this graph as well. If you were to be asked where is the actual set of coordinates that are true in both these inequalities, this extra dark purple space that you see here, this region right here, is the space of all the coordinates that work in both inequalities, and that would be the solution to your system. So as you submit your question, hopefully you can get yours to turn green and understand what that extra dark purple space is. That's your solution space for the inequalities system. Good luck, and hopefully this video helps.